She was left crying on the marble floors of the Plaza Hotel, publicly dumped by a tech billionaire because she was too fat for his public image. He thought he broke her. He didn't know the most feared mafia boss in New York was watching and ready to claim her. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan was awash in the golden glow of crystal chandeliers and the clinking of baccarat champagne flutes. It was the social event of the season, the engagement party of Richard Kensington, the 32-year-old wunderkind, CEO, of the fintech giant Aegis Pay. Standing near the towering ice sculpture at the center of the room was Clara Higgins. Clara was not what the ruthless, image-obsessed elite of New York expected to see on the arm of a billionaire. She was a heavy-set woman, proudly and visibly fat, carrying a soft, full-figured, size 18 frame. Tonight she was dressed in a custom emerald green Christian Siriano gown that hugged her lush curves and draped beautifully to the floor. For years, Clara had been Richard's anchor. She had worked double shifts as a high school math teacher to pay their rent in Queens while Richard coded his financial software in their tiny living room. She had fed him, funded his early servers, and loved him when he was nothing but a broke visionary with a laptop. But tonight, the air felt different. Cold. Richard had been avoiding her all evening, actively dodging the cameras of Vanity Fair and Vogue photographers who prowled the room. He was huddled in the corner with a group of venture capitalists and a tall, rail-thin blonde woman in a sheer silver dress. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice suddenly boomed through the PA system, cutting through the low hum of classical music. He stood on the grand staircase, tapping a microphone. The room fell entirely silent. All eyes turned to the golden boy of Wall Street. Clara smiled, clutching her Judith Lieber clutch, stepping forward. This was supposed to be the moment he toasted to their future, to the wedding they had been planning for 6 months. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight." Richard began, his tone uncharacteristically formal, devoid of any warmth. Aegis Pay is going public next month. The IPO will be the largest in the history of the New York Stock Exchange. We are entering a new echelon, and as a company grows, it must pivot. It must shed its old skin to embrace a sleeker, more dynamic future. Clara frowned her heart, doing a strange, heavy flutter. Shed its old skin, Richard looked down from the stairs, his eyes locking onto Clara. There was no love in his gaze, only a cold, calculated boardroom assessment. "I have always believed in brutal honesty." Richard continued, his voice echoing off the gilded ceilings. "And the truth is, my personal life must also reflect the polished elite brand of Aegis Pay. Clara, you are a kind woman. You were there in the beginning. But let's be realistic. Look around this room. Look at yourself." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. High society matrons covered their mouths. Wall Street executives exchanged stunned, uncomfortable glances. Clara froze, the blood draining from her face. No, he wouldn't. Not here. Not in front of 500 people. "My investors at Goldman Sachs and Sequoia Capital expect a certain standard from the face of a billion-dollar enterprise," Richard said smoothly, entirely detached from the cruelty of his words. "I am a man who demands perfection, health, discipline, an aesthetic that inspires power. Clara, you don't fit that profile anymore. You haven't for a long time. You've let yourself go, and frankly, you are too heavy to carry the image of my brand. I need a partner who reflects the pinnacle of success, not complacency." The silence in the room was deafening. It was a suffocating, heavy silence, broken only by the faint whir of a photographer's camera lens adjusting. "Therefore," Richard announced, turning his gaze toward the rail-thin blonde standing near the stairs, "I am officially calling off our engagement. I will be moving forward both personally and professionally with Chloe. She is an international model, a fitness ambassador, and the perfect representation of where Aegis is heading. Chloe smirked, stepping up the stairs to loop her thin arm through Richard's. Clara couldn't breathe. The emerald gown suddenly felt like a straitjacket. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, hot and stinging, but she refused to let them fall. The man she had financially supported, the man whose tears she had wiped when his first prototype failed, had just thrown her away like a defective piece of hardware in front of the most powerful people in America. Because of her weight. Because of a superficial standard of perfection. Security will escort you to a car. Clara. Richard dismissed her, turning away to clink his glass with Chloe. I'll have my assistant wire you a generous severance for your time. Severance. He called their 7-year relationship time that needed a severance. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Clara turned around. The whispers hit her like physical blows. Did you see her arms? I mean, he's a billionaire. Now he can do better. It's a miracle he kept the fat cow around this long. Every step toward the grand brass doors of the plaza felt like walking through wet cement. Clara kept her chin high, her thick curls bouncing slightly, as she marched out of the ballroom through the opulent lobby and out into the freezing, rainy November night. As the heavy glass doors shut behind her, the adrenaline evaporated. Clara collapsed against the cold stone facade of the hotel, the icy rain instantly soaking her hair. She wrapped her arms around her heavy-set frame, the devastating reality crashing down on her. She was 30 years old, publicly humiliated, heartbroken, and completely alone on Fifth Avenue. She let out a single gut-wrenching sob, hiding her face in her hands. The rain was relentless, washing the neon reflections of Manhattan down the gutters. Clara stood under the grand marquee of the plaza, shivering violently. The valets were too busy rushing to fetch the Ferraris and Bentleys of the departing guests to notice the woman in the ruined emerald dress standing in the shadows. She needed to hail a cab. She needed to get back to Queens, pack her bags, and disappear. Before she could step off the curb, a massive matte black Mercedes Maybach OA680 glided silently through the rain and stopped directly in front of her. It wasn't just a car. It was a fortress on wheels. The tinted windows were pitch black, and the vehicle radiated an aura of pure, intimidating power. 2 men in impeccably tailored charcoal suits stepped out of the front doors. They didn't look like hotel security or Wall Street bankers. They moved with the lethal, fluid grace of predators. They ignored the valet walking straight to the rear passenger door and opening it wide. "Get in, Miss Higgins," a voice rumbled from the dark interior of the Maybach. The voice was deep, gravelly, and carried an undeniable edge of authority. It commanded the space around it, making even the pouring rain seem insignificant. Clara took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" A man leaned forward into the soft, ambient glow of the cabin's leather interior. Clara's breath caught in her throat. He was devastatingly handsome, but not in the polished, soft way Richard was. This man had a face carved from granite, sharp jawline, an aristocratic nose with a slight bump indicating it had once been broken, and piercing, predatory storm-grey eyes. He wore a midnight blue bespoke suit without a tie, the collar of his crisp white shirt unbuttoned to reveal a glimpse of dark chest hair and a heavy gold chain. He looked like danger incarnate. "My name is Dominic Falcone," the man said softly. Clara froze. Even as a high school teacher in Queens, she knew that name. Everyone in New York knew that name, even if they only dared to whisper it. Dominic Falcone wasn't on the cover of Forbes. He was the head of the Falcone Syndicate, the undisputed king of the East Coast underworld. He controlled the ports, the unions, and a vast empire of casinos and real estate. He was a man who allegedly made politicians disappear and bought judges like they were cheap cigars. I'm fine, Clara stammered, pulling her soaked dress tighter around her wide hips. I'm waiting for a yellow cab. You're freezing, Clara, and a cab isn't coming in this weather. Dominic said, his gaze dropping to her shivering shoulders, then sweeping appreciatively over her full curves. There was no disgust in his eyes, no boardroom assessment. When he looked at her body, his eyes darkened with something feral and entirely male. Get in the car. I'm not asking. Too cold and emotionally exhausted to fight, and frankly terrified to say no to Dominic Falcone, Clara gathered the heavy, wet fabric of her skirt and climbed into the back of the Maybach. The doors shut with a solid, heavy thud, sealing them inside a quiet, opulent sanctuary, smelling of rich leather and expensive cedarwood cologne. Dominic poured a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter and handed it to her. Drink. It's Macallan. It'll warm your blood, he instructed. Clara took it with shaking hands, taking a sip. The liquid burned a pleasant trail down her throat. She looked at the terrifying mob boss sitting inches away from her. Why are you here, Mr. Falcone? You weren't on Richard's guest list. Dominic let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated in the confined space. No, I wasn't. Richard Kensington likes to pretend he built his little empire from a garage in Silicon Valley. He forgets who gave him the seed money when the banks laughed at his algorithm. Clara's eyes widened. Richard borrowed money from you. $50 million, Dominic stated casually, swirling the scotch in his own glass. Cleaned through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. Your shiny, perfect billionaire ex-fiancée is nothing but a fraud who owes his soul to my family. I was there tonight to remind him of a payment he missed, but instead I got a front row seat to a Greek tragedy. Clara looked down at her lap, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over her. You saw. I saw a peasant try to humiliate a queen, Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its conversational tone. I saw a weak boy discard a woman of substance because he's terrified of anything he can't control. He discarded me because I'm fat, Mr. Falcone. Clara said, her voice cracking, deciding she had nothing left to lose by being blunt. You don't have to dress it up. Dominic shifted closer. The sheer size of him, his broad shoulders and muscular frame seemed to dwarf her, yet Clara didn't feel threatened. She felt anchored. He reached out his large, calloused hand, gently catching her chin and forcing her to look into his stormy eyes. Listen to me carefully, Clara, Dominic murmured, his thumb brushing against her lower lip. A boy wants a stick figure he can parade around like a hood ornament. A man, a real man, wants a woman. Softness, curves, hips that can bear weight, and a spirit that doesn't snap when the wind blows. You are lush, Clara. You are a feast. And Richard Kensington is a fool who prefers starving. Clara stared at him, her heart thumping wildly. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her body, her heavy, soft body, as if it were a prize rather than a problem to be solved. Why are you telling me this? Clara whispered. Dominic's lips curved into a dangerous, wolfish smile. Because Richard is going to pay for insulting you, and he's going to pay me my $50 million. But I don't just want his money anymore. I want his company. I want his reputation. I want to utterly destroy him. He leaned back, his gaze locking onto hers with terrifying intensity. And I want you by my side when I do it. Clara gasped. What? You built him, Clara. You know his accounts, his passwords, the skeletons in his corporate closet. Dominic said, his voice smooth and hypnotic. Help me take Aegis Pay apart, piece by piece. In exchange, I will give you the world. You won't just get revenge on the man who embarrassed you. You'll become untouchable." Clara looked out the tinted window at the passing city lights. She was a math teacher. She was a good, law-abiding citizen. But Richard had ripped her heart out and stomped on it for sport. He had humiliated her for the crime of having a body that didn't fit his corporate aesthetic. She turned back to Dominic, feeling a dangerous spark ignite in her chest. "What exactly are you offering Mr. Falcone?" "I'm offering you a crown," Dominic said, pouring her another glass of scotch. "Richard threw you to the wolves tonight, Clara. He didn't realize you were destined to lead the pack." Clara took the glass. The sweet, compliant fiancée who had died on the marble floors of the plaza was gone. "Call me Dominic Mirabella," he whispered, clinking his glass against hers. "Because we are going to be very close." The penthouse of the Falcone Tower in Tribeca was a sprawling fortress of floor-to-ceiling glass, imported Italian marble, and heavily armed security. For 3 weeks it had been Clara's sanctuary and her war room. She hadn't lost a single pound. In fact, under the careful attention of Dominic's private chef, who prepared rich risottos and decadent chocolate soufflés at Dominic's strict instruction to spoil her, she had never looked softer, healthier, or more radiant. Her wardrobe had been entirely replaced. Gone were the modest, oversized cardigans she wore to hide herself. In their place were tailored silk wrap dresses, wide-leg trousers from Brunello Cucinelli, and cashmere coats that accentuated her lush, full-figured silhouette. But her true transformation wasn't physical. It was the lethal sharpening of her mind. Clara sat at the massive oak dining table, 4 glowing monitors displaying lines of complex code and financial spreadsheets. As a mathematician, she understood numbers better than anyone Richard had ever hired at Aegis Pay. Because she had lived with Richard during the company's infancy, she knew the foundational architecture of his financial software. Dominic stood behind her, sipping a dark espresso. He wore a fitted black Henley that clung to his broad chest, his presence a heavy, comforting heat against her back. He rested his large, calloused hands on her plush shoulders, massaging the tension from her neck. "You've been staring at the Cayman shell accounts for 6 hours, Maya Bella," Dominic murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "Take a break. Let my accountants handle the grunt work." "Your accountants are looking for traditional money laundering," Clara replied, her eyes darting across the screen. "Richard is arrogant, but he isn't stupid. He wouldn't hide your 50 million in a standard offshore trust. He hid it in the algorithm." Dominic's hands paused. "Explain." Clara leaned back, pointing a manicured finger at the screen. "Aegis Pay processes microtransactions, millions of them a second. I just ran a regression analysis on the transaction latency. Richard coded a fractional siphon. Every time Aegis processes a payment, it skims a fraction of a cent, something so microscopic the SEC and Bloomberg auditors wouldn't catch it. He's pooling that skimmed money into a decentralized crypto wallet to pay you back without it showing on his balance sheets. He's stealing from his own users to cover his mob debt." A low, dangerous laugh rumbled in Dominic's chest. He spun Clara's chair around so she faced him, his storm-grey eyes burning with a mixture of predatory pride and deep, unrestrained lust. "You are a terrifying woman, Clara Higgins," he whispered, leaning down to capture her lips in a bruising, possessive kiss. When he pulled away, Clara was breathless, her skin flushed. He looked at her, not just as a lover but as a true partner. "If we hand this proof to the Securities and Exchange Commission on the morning of his initial public offering," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly with adrenaline, "Aegis Pay doesn't just crash, it burns to the ground. Richard goes to federal prison for wire fraud." "No," Dominic corrected his tone, turning to ice. If we just send it to the SEC, the government seizes the assets. We don't want to destroy the company, Clara. We want to own it. Dominic stepped away, pulling a sleek encrypted phone from his pocket. I'm going to have my attorneys draft a hostile debt-to-equity conversion contract. Richard owes me $50 million plus interest. But with the threat of federal prison hanging over his head, he's going to sign over 60% of Aegis Pay's voting shares directly to you. To me, Clara gasped, her hands flying to her chest. I have enough money, Clara, Dominic said, looking at her with fierce devotion. This is your revenge. You built that empire. Tomorrow you take it back. The morning of the Aegis Pay, initial public offering broke crisp and cold over Lower Manhattan. Outside the neoclassical columns of the New York Stock Exchange Broad Street was a sea of satellite trucks, barricades, and shivering financial journalists. This was the most anticipated tech IPO since Facebook. Inside the NYSE's exclusive VIP bell-ringing suite, hovering directly above the frenzied trading floor, Richard Kensington was pacing a hole into the antique Persian rug. He looked immaculate in a midnight blue Tom Ford suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, but his demeanor was fraying. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his Rolex Daytona. The $50 million payment to the Falcone syndicate was now 2 weeks overdue. Every time his phone buzzed, his stomach plummeted, expecting it to be a picture of a shallow grave. He had convinced himself that his algorithmic siphon was flawless, that he had successfully masked the embezzlement, but the absolute silence from the underworld was deafening. Sitting on a velvet sofa nearby, oblivious to the impending doom, was Chloe. She was busy adjusting the lighting on her iPhone, pouting her lips for an Instagram story. "Babe," she whined, not looking up from her screen. "Can we do a quick video before the bell? My followers are literally dying to see my dress." "Not right now, Chloe," Richard snapped, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He turned to his lead counsel. "Are we absolutely sure the SEC clearance is finalized? No last-minute holds." "You're entirely cleared, Mr. Kensington," the lawyer assured him. "In 10 minutes, you ring that bell, and you become a multi-billionaire on paper." Richard let out a shaky breath, finally allowing a smug smile to creep onto his face. He had done it. He had outsmarted the banks, he had outsmarted the government, and he had outsmarted Dominic Falcone. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany double doors of the VIP suite burst open. Richard's private security detail, 2 massive ex-Marines, stepped forward with their hands on their earpieces, only to be violently shoved against the wood paneling by 4 men in impeccably tailored charcoal suits. The intruders moved with terrifying synchronized precision, stripping the guards of their concealed weapons in seconds and securing the exits. The excited chatter in the suite died instantly. The PR executives froze. Chloe dropped her phone. Stepping gracefully through the parted sea of armed men was Clara Higgins. Richard's jaw dropped. She was a vision of absolute, untouchable power. Clara wore a bespoke crimson-red trench coat, tightly cinched, to accentuate her wide, lush waist, paired with razor-sharp black Christian Louboutin stilettos. Her thick dark hair cascaded in glossy, voluminous waves over her shoulders. She didn't look like the broken, weeping woman he had discarded on the marble floors of the Plaza Hotel. She moved with the predatory confidence of a billionaire predator, completely unapologetic about the space her curves occupied. And walking right beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, was the undeniable king of the New York underworld. Dominic Falcone radiated pure, lethal menace. "Clara." Richard choked out the color draining from his face, so fast he looked sickly. His eyes darted frantically from his ex-fiancée to the Mafia Boss standing beside her. What? What the hell is this? You can't be here. Security works for me today. Dominic stated his voice, a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. He stepped further into the room, his storm-grey eyes pinning Richard in place. You missed a payment, Richard. Mr. Falcone, please. Richard stammered, abandoning his golden boy CEO persona in an instant. He held his hands up, taking a terrified step backward. The IPO. The liquidity is coming. I just need the bell to ring. The moment the market opens, I'll have your money. I swear to God. I don't want your liquid cash, Richard, Dominic said, coldly, his lips curling into a cruel smirk. He gestured toward Clara. My brilliant associate here has found some very interesting discrepancies in your transaction latency. Richard's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. He stared at Clara, the reality of her presence finally clicking into place. You looked at the code. I didn't just look at it, Richard. I dissected it. Clara said, her voice smooth, steady, and devoid of any leftover affection. She felt a thrilling rush of adrenaline. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. I found the fractional siphon. I found the decentralized crypto wallets you've been using to skim fractions of a cent off every user transaction. You're stealing from your own customers to pay your mob debts. You're out of your depth, Clara, Richard hissed, attempting a desperate bluff. You don't understand the architecture. It's a latency buffer. It's federal wire fraud, Clara interrupted sharply, pulling a thick manila envelope from her designer tote bag and slamming it onto the glass coffee table. I forwarded a preliminary summary of your latency buffer to Director Mitchell at the Securities and Exchange Commission 30 minutes ago. Are you insane? Richard screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged forward, his fists clenched, but before he could take a second step, Dominic moved. In a blur of motion, Dominic had Richard by the throat, slamming him back against the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the trading floor. The glass groaned under the impact. Richard gagged his perfectly polished shoes, kicking off the ground as Dominic effortlessly lifted him. Keep your voice down when you speak to her, Dominic whispered lethally, his face inches from Richard's sweating forehead. She is a queen. You are a dying insect. Show some respect. Chloe let out a terrified squeak, realizing exactly who Dominic was, and the extreme danger she was in. The model didn't hesitate. She grabbed her silver clutch, kicked off her heels, and practically sprinted for the door, abandoning Richard without a single backward glance. Dominic dropped Richard, who collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air and clutching his bruised throat. The SEC is holding off on their raid, Clara said coldly, looking down at the pathetic man who had once humiliated her for her weight. They are waiting for my final confirmation. If I make the call, Aegis Pay crashes before it even opens, and you spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Dominic pulled a sleek silver Montblanc pen from his breast pocket and dropped it next to the contract spilling out of the manila envelope. This is a hostile debt-to-equity conversion, Dominic commanded. You owe me $50 million plus massive interest. You are going to sign over 65% of Aegis Pay's voting shares directly to Clara. You will instantly step down as CEO, citing sudden health reasons. Clara takes over as majority shareholder and chairwoman. If you sign it, Clara patches the siphon from the inside. The SEC gets an update that the anomaly was a benign bug, and you get to walk away with a minority stake and your freedom. You can't do this to me. Richard wept, completely broken, his ego shattered. I built this company. No, Clara corrected him, her voice ringing with finality. I built you, and today I'm repossessing my investment. Sign the paper, Richard. Trembling, violently defeated on every level, Richard crawled to the table, picked up the pen, and signed his life away. Clara picked up the document, handing it to one of Dominic's men. She looked at Richard one last time. "Security will escort you out the back. You don't fit the profile of my brand anymore." As Richard was hauled out of the room by his collar, the NYSE floor manager tentatively peeked through the doorway, his face pale. "Miss the bell rings in 2 minutes." Clara turned to Dominic. He offered her his arm, his eyes blazing with absolute devotion, pride, and burning desire. "Shall we, Madam Chairwoman?" Dominic asked, a devastating wolfish smile playing on his lips. Clara looped her arm through his, her soft, lush body pressing against his hard, protective frame. She felt entirely invincible. "We shall." Together they walked out onto the balcony, overlooking the frantic trading floor. As Clara pressed the button to ring the opening bell, the deafening roar of Wall Street washed over them. She had survived a brutal betrayal, embraced her true worth, and claimed a billionaire's empire, all with the deadliest king in the city standing proudly by her side. If you loved this story of ultimate revenge power and finding real love that appreciates every curve, you are not alone. Clara proved that real strength and beauty don't fit into a superficial corporate mold. Smash that like button if you were cheering for Clara and Dominic's epic takeover. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a dramatic mafia romance, and subscribe for more thrilling, twisting stories of betrayal and sweet, unstoppable vengeance. See you next time.